Thank you, Katie. I'll just start with a very sad anecdote. You won't really feel sorry for me, but last year Richmond won the grand final, if people are aware. And in January, my girlfriend said, I'm turning 50, and I remember in med school we went away to Mexico together. Can you come to the Greek islands with me for my 50th? So I was in the Greek islands watching the AFL Global Pass app, and it crashed in the third quarter. And so I rang my husband, who was at the G, who'd ignored me. And then I WhatsApped my son, who picked up, and I said, can you show me the AFL Grand Final? So I watched the last quarter on a screen like ants running around, and my girlfriend got her phone and had the ABC live radio coverage, which was 15 seconds behind the Grand Final. So that's how I lost, saw the last quarter. But I am going next Thursday night. We got tickets for that yesterday. So anyway, die hard. Move over melatonin. So, the role of sleep, why do we care about it? Why does it matter if we don't get enough sleep? And I'm sure you'll be familiar with a lot of this, but of course it's part of our energy renewal. Growth hormone is secreted overnight, which in children is incredibly important to help them grow. It's associated with brain maturation, information processing, learning, immune response. So there's been studies done in adults where they've sleep deprived them and put rhinovirus up their nostrils, and taken another cohort and not sleep deprived them and put rhinovirus up their nostrils. And lo and behold, the adults who had chronic sleep deprivation over 5 nights were the ones who got a cold, and the cold lasted longer. It's also associated with memory consolidation, and there's good data again coming from the adult literature as well as the paediatric literature that with inadequate sleep or poor sleep quality, where you wake up several times a night, your short-term memory is affected. So all of these things are important. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the architecture of normal sleep, because that's what you need to understand when you're explaining to your patients and to the parents of your patients why they might be having a particular sleep problem. And I'm really going to concentrate on behavioural sleep problems today, because that's my area of interest and expertise. So we have 2 distinct, systems of sleep, light or rapid eye movement REM sleep, and deep or non-rapid eye movement sleep. And you can actually see these systems beginning around 3 months in utero. When a baby's born, anyone will know who's had a baby, their sleep is all over the place, and they don't start to consolidate their sleep into the night time until what age do you think? How many weeks of age? Maybe never, I know. Well, in theory, it's from 3 weeks of age, but it's all over the place. And often babies sleep, there's no routine or pattern that the baby should have until at least 3 to 4 months of age. So just if you have a younger baby coming to you, often it's reassurance to parents, not trying to fix a sleep problem. The other thing that changes is the proportion of time we spend in REM sleep versus light sleep. So this is just data looking at age, so 28-weeker through to 16 years of age. Total sleep time, so when we're babies we spend 16, 18, 20, 22 hours of a 24-hour period asleep, like koalas. This is dropping down here at term, and of course dropping off by the time we're teenagers. But children spend proportionally more time in REM sleep than non-REM sleep. And what parents will often say and come to me and say is, my child is a really restless sleeper. And this is often a kid they've brought into their room or into their bed because they can't get them to sleep. And this child is moving all over the place. It's often just normal because proportionally kids spend more time in REM sleep than an adult does. So often you need to distinguish that, and it may not be restless legs or polymorphic limb movement disorder, which I can talk about a bit later. So this is a very basic diagram of our REM and non-REM sleep cycles that I draw for every patient that I see. So we all start off the night awake, and it takes a good 20 or 30 minutes to go from REM into non-REM or deep sleep. And typically at the start of the night we spend 3 or 4 hours in our deep sleep. And then we come up into light sleep or REM sleep, we go back into deep sleep, up into light sleep, back into deep sleep, And we keep cycling like this throughout the night until we wake up in the morning. How long are those sleep cycles in adults? How many minutes? 90. In babies, they're 30, 40 minutes. So you can often see a baby who has a cat nap during the day just for 30 minutes, and you can set your clock by it. In primary school kids, it might be an hour, and it starts to, elongate as we get older. The way we go to sleep here at the start of the night is the way we expect to go back to sleep when we naturally wake up overnight. So, when you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and your doonas come off, or you're just a bit uncomfortable, and you just adjust yourself and you go back to sleep. That's you coming up out of your REM sleep, waking up briefly, and then going back into sleep. But what if you were rocked to sleep here, or fed to sleep, or had a dummy in your mouth, or you were being driven around the block to go to sleep? And that's great, you get off to sleep, and then your mum or dad sneak you back in to your cot or your bed, or transfer you there, and then you wake up here and you go, hang on, where's my dummy, where's my rocking, where's the car, where's my feed? And that's when babies will call out and cry out, older children will come out of the bedroom. And those things that happen at the start of the night are called sleep associations or sleep cues. And if they're not parent independent, then that can cause problems overnight. So I'll come back to that in a bit. What regulates our sleep? There's really two parts. There's the homeostatic regulation and circadian regulation. So homeostatic regulation, put very simply, is our drive to go to sleep. So if you had a bad night last night and you woke up frequently overnight, or you went to bed too late and you had to get up early to go to work today and come to the conference, and you just didn't get enough sleep, that's going to make you feel tired, and that gives you an increased drive to go to sleep. The problem is if you have a nap in the afternoon, that makes you feel better for the afternoon, but that stops you going to sleep later tonight. So one of the things we often see is all parents come and say, should I give them an extra nap? And then that sometimes pushes a child's bedtime out to 10 or 11 or 12. The other part of our body that regulates our sleep is the circadian rhythm or the body clock. And you are right about to head in during Matt's talk into a circadian dip or trough. So it's your challenge ahead of you, Matt, to keep them awake. Yeah. And that's when we reach for the chocolate bar or the coffee or the tea to make us feel, more alive. Luckily, there's a circadian dip in the middle of the night. That's fine. But then there's circadian peaks. So there's early morning, and that's the kids who get up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and won't go back to sleep. My son did that for 18 months. And there's also a circadian peak in the evening, and when kids get their second wind and you just can't get them off to bed, and that's another issue. And parents can get very angry with their kids, but if you actually explain to them, look, this is their physiology, you can start to take some of that anger away from them. Okay, the circadian rhythm is maintained internally and externally. So the external things in our environment are light and dark. So melatonin, is obviously our sleep hormone, and that's released when things are dark. Things like timing of meals, setting your alarm clock, having to get up and go to school, they're all sort of external cues that entrain our circadian rhythm. Our body temperature is an internal cue. It drops at night to help us get to sleep. But probably in this digital age, the biggest issue is blue light that comes from iPads, phones, tablets, and that blocks melatonin. So that stops us going to sleep. So what do we do about that? Because really, if you look now at social and school activities, particularly for teenagers, but more and more so for primary school and even preschoolers, it's all on tablets and apps. So 75% of Australian males play video games weekly, and that's associated with delayed sleep onset and decreased total sleep time. Almost all schools now require an adolescent to have a laptop or other device to complete and submit their work. And so melatonin is switched off when the adolescents or the kids are using these screens, unless they put a filter on it. There's particular apps you can do to try and filter out the blue light. But there's also some research showing that the content of what they can do, what they're doing, if they're playing violent games, that sort of thing, can also prevent them going to sleep. So it's not just blocking the melatonin. Okay, so what are the common sleep problems that we see? And I'm just sticking to behavioural sleep problems. So the sleep onset association is the one I talked about where the child gets rocked to sleep, fed to sleep, or mum and dad have to sit there while they fall asleep. And they go off to sleep okay, but then they come out of their deep sleep into light sleep 3 or 4 hours later. They're not being rocked, they're not being fed, or mum and dad aren't there, so they call out, cry out, or come into the parent's bed to try and go back to sleep. The second really common one, particularly in adolescence, is delayed sleep phase. So that's when the child or adolescent has shifted their bedtime late, so they want to get up late in the morning. So they might go to bed at 11 p.m. and someone has to wake them up to start the day. They've shifted their whole sleep phase. So they might be getting enough sleep, and if you lived in Providence, Rhode Island as an adolescent, you would go to school at 10 a.m. because the lead researcher in paediatric sleep lives there, and she has persuaded the local government to shift adolescent high school start times. It's just not going to happen in Australia. The other really common issue is limit setting disorder, particularly in the toddlers. So that's the kids that come in and out of the bedroom 10 times. I want to drink, I want to go to the toilet, I want to tell you something, there's monsters. More and more I'm seeing anxiety. So anxiety, the child doesn't come in and out of their bed. They don't necessarily have to have mum or dad sitting next to them to go to sleep, but they're lying there worrying about things. Something's happening at school, they're being bullied, they've got learning issues at school. And these kids just can't switch off, and they're often generalised warriors, or there's a history of separation anxiety from kinder and other times. And then there's my group I call true insomnias, that the child is unable to go to sleep even if they go to bed at a later time. They just can't fall asleep. And that's probably the only group where melatonin is useful, but I'll get to that in a second. As I said, these kids with true insomnia, they're not worrying about things, they're not coming in and out of their bedroom with a limit setting disorder, they don't have to have someone or something to fall asleep, they just can't do it. So, how do we manage these problems? The first step really is for all behavioural problems is to check what we call sleep hygiene, or really good sleep habits. And there's evidence to show that just doing this in of itself will fix around 10 to 15% of sleep problems. So what is good sleep hygiene? Keep the bedroom a media-free zone, no TV, phones, etc. Set the bedtime and stick to it. Have a calm bedtime routine, drawing, playing games, reading, rather than on the computer. Avoiding caffeine after 3 p.m, so drinks, tea, coffee, Coke, that sort of thing. And having a set waking time in the morning that really on weekends may not shift by more than 30 minutes or so. So keeping that fairly consistent. Then what do you do? So I'm going to tell you about a few tricks, and then we'll talk about a case study of what to do with a boy called Ed, who I saw. But another good strategy, if a child's taking more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, between going to bed and actually falling asleep, is using this strategy called bedtime fading. And what you do is you temporarily set their bedtime later and then sneak it forward by 15 minutes every couple of nights. And it's a bit like readjusting their circadian rhythm or their body clock. And it's like adjusting to jet lag. So if you've got a kid who doesn't fall asleep until, midnight, and the parents are putting them in bed at 9 p.m, you've got 3 hours of a battle on your hands. And no one's winning and everyone's getting grumpy. So you temporarily set their bedtime to quarter to midnight for 2 nights, then 11:30 for the next 2 nights, then 11:15 p.m. for the next 2 nights, etc., until you get to your desired bedtime. So this is a strategy that you can use in conjunction with other therapies as well, and you need to give it at least 7 to 10 nights to make it work. Then there's something called the checking method, and this tends to be really good for those kids who are coming in and out of their rooms multiple times, or if they've got a sleep onset association, they have to have mum or dad next to them to fall asleep, or if they're a little bit anxious but not incredibly anxious. And this is where the parent says goodnight to the child, tucks them into bed, and then they leave. And they promise to come back and check on the child in 1 to 2 minutes. And they do that, and they keep coming back into the room, but they make the visit very brief and very boring and very much the same thing each time. And eventually the kid learns that, look, if I cry and carry on, mum or dad might come back, but they'll just give me a kiss goodnight and they leave. I might as well go to sleep. I once had a family who were on a farm, and mum used to go out to the paddock and come and back and forth because she had to go and check on the sheep and bring them in. And basically, she had very long periods of being out of the bedroom for the checking method. But eventually what happens is the parent comes back to check on the child and they've fallen asleep on their own. And that's what you're aiming for. The next method is called camping out. Go back. Why is that? Oh, sorry. Right. Why are we not? Where's my camping out? Camping out, great. This is more gradual. Works for limit setting disorder, sleep onset association, or whether the child or the parent is more anxious. And this is where you place a camp bed or a chair right next to the child's bed. And the first few nights the parent might sit there and for a younger child might pat or stroke them off to sleep. Once the child's going to sleep pretty easily like that, like in 10, 20 minutes, then the parent sits next to the bed but doesn't talk. And then they start to move their chair or camp bed away from the child's bedroom and out the door. So this is a much more gradual process, but it works well if there's an anxious parent or an anxious child in particular. Okay, so what do we do about these kids who are more anxious? And this is my approach to, a primary school age child or even an adolescent. So obviously trying to have a discussion and find out why and address it. And I do 1 to 10 happiness scales. And I say if 10 out of 10 was, school was fantastic, you want to be there on Saturday and Sunday, versus 1 out of 10, it's awful and I hate it. Mark on that scale where your happiness is, and then tell me 3 things that would change. So I've had kids say to me, it would be good if I wasn't dumb and stupid at maths. It would be good if I was not being bullied by so-and-so. So sometimes they will tell you what's going on, and that gives you a track to try and address those underlying causes of their anxiety. Older children might like to write down, younger children might like to draw their worries and put them in a book and close that book for the night so they're not thinking about those worries. Or I had a kid on the autism spectrum who put his worries into the iCloud, and that's where he was happy to park them for the night and not worry about things. There's lots of apps and information on the web about relaxation, exercise and visual imagery. And if the child's taking a long time, to fall asleep, combine it with bedtime fading. So what about this boy? So look at Ed, he's 12, he doesn't get to sleep until 1 a.m. Mum needs to wake him up every morning to get to school. He sleeps until 11 a.m. on the weekends, and he has his phone and an iPad in his room. What's happening? What are you going to do? Comments? Ban the screens. He doesn't want to, and Mum said, I can't take the screens away from him. He will kick up the biggest fuss. How do you get rid of screens? What was that? You take them away. I can't do it. I'm going down to the next door. I can't do it. Yeah, so you could try and, ban the blue light emission. That's a start. Any other thoughts? So turn off the Wi-Fi. That is another good way of doing it as well, absolutely. And this is some other stuff that I do. So for Ed, and I'll whiz through because we're running out of time, I would make sure we've got to get the phones out of his room. I would use bedtime fading with him and make sure with bedtime fading, because he's trying to sleep in, turn off his melatonin, open up the curtains, open up the blinds at 7 a.m. so he starts to wake up and reset his circadian rhythm. And avoid long sleep-ins on the weekend. But I often do rewards. And parents say to me, is this a bribe? And I say, no, we're trying to reward a good behaviour. We're not trying to bribe them to do the wrong thing. So for little kids, I use stars or stickers for giving up the iPad or whatever it might be, and after 4 stickers in a row, they get a lucky dip. For older primary school teenage kids, I use raffle tickets that are worth a cash amount, 50 cents. You've got to negotiate this pretty quickly because they go $5, and they go, no, 50 cents. And they build up their raffle tickets and they can cash them in at the end of the week to spend on something they want, not what their parents want. And that's often a powerful motivator. Whatever you do with rewards, the novelty wears off after about 2 weeks. So you're just trying to shift that behaviour over the 2 weeks. So I agree, get rid of the iPads, turn off the Wi-Fi, do all those things first, but if the family's really resistant, this might be a way to go. Contracts are good for teenagers, and I sign a contract with the parent. The teenager has to say something and change their behaviour, and the parent has to. So maybe Ed will give up his iPhone if his mum stops nagging him about his bedroom. So pick something they're both happy to do and equally do, and sign off on a contract. True insomnia, so they're the kids who I said before who aren't worried, they're not coming in and out of their room. Try good sleep hygiene and bedtime fading for 2 weeks, but if it hasn't worked after that, then trial melatonin. And I would give melatonin a trial for, at least 1 to 3 months to see if it makes a difference. How much melatonin? 1 to 3 milligrams for primary school. You may go 3 to 6 milligrams for teenagers. You need to give melatonin at least 60 minutes before the desired bedtime. It only helps with going to sleep. It does not help with overnight waking. Where do I get it from? Compounding pharmacies, but they're expensive. I actually go online now, go to the Vitamin Grocer, which is an Australian website, make sure they don't get the homeopathic version. The only thing on the PBS is Circadian, which is a long-acting version, and 2 milligrams. Here's some resources for you, and I think all our slides are shared, so you can look at that. And we have developed an app, and I'm about to trial it with our sleep clinic. This is an app for parents to manage their kids' sleep problems. So watch this space, it's coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Harriet. I did not see one person asleep there, so
That's
well
Matt's
done,
fault.
all of you guys. Thank you very much for that. I was self-examining my own sleep hygiene because I'm a champion sleeper, but thank you very much for explaining all of those things in a way that I will use for lots of people in my life. I will hand it over to Ben for some questions.
So there were a few people sort of sharing some of the individual strategies that you talked about, particularly sleep fading. And then Nikki Brennan has a question which mirrors Katie's statement. So extrapolating from children into doctors, what rewards do you suggest we use on ourselves? I know I'm guilty of many of those behaviours, and any suggestions on how we work those things into night shift sleep behaviours?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, night shifts are pretty hideous, and I think the important thing is trying to get back onto your day shift is, obviously going home from your night shift, not having tea or coffee, not having too much television time. My husband works in the ED, and I come home and I hear stuff going on. I'm like, turn off the television, go to sleep. So quiet wind down activities, get to sleep as soon as you can. And then think about, okay, the first night off night shift, you might sleep as much as you need to, but then start to wake yourself up in the morning, setting the alarm, opening up the curtains, turning off your melatonin. So I think it's all those good sleep hygiene habits and being aware of that. There's no magic bullet for night shift. Yep.
We've got a question here from the crowd.
Thanks, Harriet. David Meldrum from Lismore. This may be a whole new talk, but any suggestions for parasomnias other than reassurance? I've recently seen a fascinating 4-year-old boy who had this weird thing. He'd go to bed at 7:30, but then from about 10 o'clock repeatedly have these episodes where mum would hear a noise and go in and find him on all fours rocking, but apparently asleep, and she's videoed this and showed it to me. So we see lots of other kind of, I guess, less intense parasomnias, but this sort of went all night and was causing a lot of sleep deprivation for the mother.
Yes, absolutely. So, if he was just rocking for a short period and then falling back asleep, I'd say go with the flow, ignore it. But if it's causing, sleep deprivation to him, which is affecting his functioning the next day, then I'd look at something called scheduled awakening. So that is where if you have a parasomnia at roughly the same time every night, you actually gently rouse the child 20 minutes before that, which resets their sleep cycle. Because the problem with the parasomnia, they get stuck between REM and non-REM sleep. So their body's awake, but their mind isn't. They don't remember it in the morning, but they can do all those wonderful things, screaming, yelling, shouting. But if you go in at 20 minutes and rouse them, you reset those sleep cycles. And you have to do this for 3 weeks. So if you Google scheduled awakening, you'll see how to do it. And that can often reset them. Other than that, if that fails, then you can try a short, like 7-day period of Phenergan or Valergan, a milligram per kilo, to try and break that cycle. And some people will move on to clonazepam, which I try and avoid, and I try and do it behaviourally. Make sure he's got good sleep hygiene, good bedtime routine, etc. leading up. The biggest cause of parasomnia is usually sleep deprivation or illness.
Yeah, interestingly, he certainly didn't behave during the day like he was sleep deprived.
Yeah.
It was Mum who was sleep deprived.
Yeah, so really, if she can ignore it very hard, just go in, check that he's not stuck or something, and then leave him be, he'll probably be fine.
Thank you.
I've got another question from Jess Zimmerman, who's asked, how long should children be on melatonin for if you're going to use it?
So that's a really good question. There's no good data out there. The longest term follow-up study is 14 months, and it's been shown to have no detriment. I certainly see children on the autism spectrum and children with ADHD who seem to be on it for a long time, and if I take them off it, they get major insomnia and the whole family goes pear-shaped and the child does. So in a typically developing child, I would aim for 3 months and then trial them off it and see how they go, making sure you've addressed all the underlying behavioural issues. But I think kids on the spectrum and kids with ADHD, it's often a much longer period. Yep.
Well, please join me in thanking Harriet on a wonderful talk about sleep.